In the late 90s and early 2000s, a number of DC writers and artists such as Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, and Mark Millar were all set to pitch what Morrison described as the best, most thoroughly worked out take on a major character you are ever likely to see for Superman. But the shifting dynamics in the machine that is DC Comics threw a kink into their plan, and the pitch was cancelled when Paul Levitz returned as editor and told Morrison that writers like him, i.e. their top talent, would never be put on any ongoing books related to Superman or Batman. Since the rejection, small but crucial details have come out, mostly from Morrison being asked about the infamous pitch on podcasts, at conventions, and by news outlets. What follows is the initial pitch for Superman 2000. The story of Superman 2000, or Superman Now, varies and has had many multiple versions told throughout the years, but piecing together the story opens up one of the most interesting story creations ever made. In 1998, Grant Morrison and Mark Waid were wandering the streets of San Diego in the late hours after San Diego Comic-Con. They were talking about how they would revitalize the Superman and Superman family books, but they didn't really know the way to take the character. Walking these streets, they came upon a man dressed as Superman, obviously from the nearby Comic-Con. One for cosmic happenstance, Morrison began a conversation with Superman, who answered all his questions in character as the Man of Steel. The one thing Morrison was intrigued with was the way the man sat, comfortably with a gentle grin covering his face. Seeing this, he realized that he really only had seen Superman posing or flexing, showing off his superhuman physique. Grant said this about the man: "This is how Superman would sit. He wouldn't puff out his chest or posture heroically. He would be totally chilled. If nothing can hurt you, you can afford to be cool. A man like Superman would never tense against the cold. He would be completely laid back and untense." This image would actually make it into the comics, adorning the front cover of Morrison's All-Star Superman issue 1. From this meeting, Morrison, along with Mark Waid, a young Mark Millar, and Tom Peyer, put together a pitch for revamping the character for the new century, initially titled Superman 2000, later to be called Superman Now. As if by coincidence, Eddie Berganza was about to start his editorial tenure on the Superman books and was on the lookout for exactly what Morrison and his team had in mind. Commissioning the team to take over in January 2000, the four writers would begin writing Action Comics' Adventures of Superman, Superman, and the Superman Man of Steel books. Unfortunately, executive editor Paul Levitz returned from vacation and learned that the Superman line was not only undergoing a major overhaul, but Eddie had not bothered to tell him it was being given to creators he never would allow to just board these books. Because of this, he saw to it that none of these writers would get to write an ongoing Superman title. Scrambling to find replacements, Eddie got Jeff Loeb, Joe Kelly, and Joe Casey to replace them. Morrison and Waid left for Marvel, and Millar soon followed. The three would later be able to refine their Superman ideas, as Millar soon wrote Superman Red Sun, Mark Waid wrote Superman Birthright, and Grant Morrison wrote All-Star Superman. Now to the actual pitch. The pitch is actually available online for people to read, and you can find a link below. But right now, I'm going to give people the broad strokes of it. The initial concept lies in a radical but organic reversal of the currently accepted logic of the Superman-Clark dynamic. In Superman 2000, Clark Kent isn't what Superman really is. Clark is what Superman was. Until he reached his teenage years and began to realize what all those years of soaking up the Kansas sun has done to his alien cells, Superman's story here is seen as the tale of a Midwest farmer's son who became an alien shortly after puberty. Suddenly, young Clark doesn't just know his ma and pa through sight, touch, sound. He knows the exact timbre of their pulse rates. He can look into their DNA and recognize their distinctive electrical fields and hear the neutral crackle and release of chemicals which tell him they have changed their minds about something. And he can do all this he can scan the entire environment in an instant with levels of perception we can only imagine. This is someone who, by any stretch of the imagination, is no longer just human, except for the part of him, the ethical humanitarian base nurtured by the Kents, which forms the unshakable foundation for everything Superman is, but who is what Superman can no longer be. Or, in other words, not our own, who, disguised as Clark Kent, fights a never-ending battle. As originally conceived by Siegel and Schuster, Clark becomes a cherished progenitor masquerade, mild-mannered, thoughtful, humane Clark. When Superman is being human, Clark is his template, but this is a being no longer confined by gravity or pain or morality, and his experiences as Superman are experiences on a level of existence we can only hope to imagine. So, in order to accomplish this transition to this new take on Superman more easily, our rationale is this. It's been established that Superman's powers are a result of solar energy saturating his cellular batteries. It's even been suggested that his powers will increase through time as he absorbs more of our sun's radiation. As part of his alien maturation process, Superman crosses a second critical threshold of solar radiation absorption and suddenly wakes up 3 times more powerful and 3 times smarter. Superman is defined immediately by his increasing capability. This is a more powerful Man of Steel, a Superman with a much keener intellect and curiosity. Suddenly there is more to learn, more to do, further to travel, and a greater responsibility than ever. At the same time, one of the first effects of his increase in power is to make Superman a little more remote. After the initial shock, Kal-El is more Superman than ever before, with a corresponding tight focus on the character and his incredible adventures. Superman's character is one we all feel we know intimately. The scene with Superboy and the grasshopper in the Superboy book Miracle Monday nails it beautifully. This could be the world's scariest living being, a detached scientific observer with the ability to experiment upon us all. Instead, this brilliant Kryptonian brain was introduced to the noblest of human values, and somehow those great powers were put to use in the service of an ethical code the Kryptonians would have been impressed and startled by. To that end, we like to balance out the battles with Brainiac and Luthor with stories which would thoroughly explore those values. Stories allowing him to return to his roots as a champion of the weak and oppressed. Even more so than for Batman, Green Lantern, Flash, all his peers and contemporaries, Superman's job is to fight for and inspire those who cannot fight for themselves. His job is to make the world a better place and to help all men realize their potential as supermen. Further to this, it is important to keep in mind the Superman-Christ parallels without being obvious and heavy-handed about them. Superman has to think differently from us, and when we see into his head, we should be shocked at the clarity and simplicity of his brilliance and compassion. This is a God sent to Earth not to suffer and die, but to live and inspire and change the face of the galaxy by his deeds and reputation. This is a man who will take time out from stopping Mongul's plan to crash Alpha Centauri into our sun system just to save a drowning dog or dry the tears of a child. We also see Superman as the ultimate communicator, invulnerable to pain. He needs none of the physical defensive postures we take for granted and so would be incredibly relaxed and open. The big smile, the instant handshake, the conviction that comes with everyone he meets is to be regarded as a friend until he proves otherwise. Superman should be indefeatable and trustworthy. No more quote-unquote bad Superman or quote-unquote crazy Superman stories for a while. His curiosity and kindness are childlike in their purity, but he should also be frighteningly quick and clever. The combination of contradictory qualities adds to his slightly removed air. His eyes go vague when he looks at your electrical field for a second and gets the idea for an oscillating defensive force field based on the rhythms of your pulse rate. Sometimes he seems not all here, but it's only because he's much more than we can sensibly hope to be. The costume would be tweaked by finally getting rid of the red underpants. This gives us a new look which somehow recovers the more classic golden age quote-unquote primal Superman look and feels like an update. This move also has instant media appeal. Finally, Superman's smart enough to wear his shorts under his pants. During the quote-unquote lost years of Clark Kent after he left his high school, if he still has any room left in there, we'd like to establish that he met and was given training by a member or members of the Justice Society, possibly Al Pratt the Atom. Since Superman in our currently operating time stream wasn't the first superhero, we'd like to restore his prominence by reaffirming that he is most certainly the greatest. We see Dr. Fate near the end of his group's life telling the JSA that their work is all but over, that the first age of heroes was but the prelude, that soon the greatest hero of all will arrive from the stars and it will be the task of the entire JSA to find him and teach him about the world of the costume crime fighters. This little addition to the past gives Superman a new grandeur, a fresh religious dimension, and ties him more directly into the development of superheroics in the DCU. Although having said that, we want to keep Superman's adventures on the periphery of the universe, in the sense that we don't really mention the JLA much or refer to a great deal of other heroes. The JSA should be seen as some misty Olympian group of Superman from the past, guys who were now dead, gone, or replaced by the greatest hero of all. At least in his own book, we want to reclaim that old feeling that Superman is the only superhero. It also seems mythically right that Superman should, at some point before he dons the cape, meet his predecessors, his John the Baptists as it were, who have awaited his coming and now have a few lessons for the fledgling hero. Priority 1 is to make Clark Kent different from Superman. For too long, they've been exactly the same guy with zero contrast between them. Clark doesn't have to be an overblown drama queen wimp, but neither can he be so super successful he has the world in his pocket. We must not forget why he was created in the first place, as a touchstone, to be the half of Superman which readers can actually relate to. In short, we'd like to use Christopher Reeve's Clark Kent as a base, but lend him enough dignity so that he's not the total Reeve cartoon. Clark is the creation of Superman's memory and imagination. His eyes can see through skin and stone and light years, only memory tells him what it's like to simply see, and he can only imagine what it must be like to need glasses. Still, Clark is a cherished link to his time and human upbringing and ethical structures forged by the Midwestern dream of Smallville. Without Clark, Superman knows he might be inclined towards detachment, aloofness, and alienness. As Clark, he can walk among people, quiet and unnoticed, learning all the time. From this perspective, the secret identity becomes something more than a human disguise gods would don or the rags kings would wear when they wanted to walk among the ordinary and the merely human. Without even a hint of condescension, Clark is eternally delighted by humanity. A man whose perceptions so routinely unlock mysteries and secrets genuinely loves to be confronted by the only thing the universe which can actually surprise him. Clark's also the sob-sister for the Daily Planet, if not all of Metropolis. Despite his attempts to keep a low profile, compassion radiates from him, and people pick up on it almost immediately. Friends and total strangers alike constantly confess their plights and problems to poor Clark. They don't want advice, they just want someone to listen, and no one listens better than Clark. This aspect of the character naturally opens up the occasional avenue to a smaller human interest story which can be investigated by Clark the reporter and by us the writers. Lois brings us to the second major phase of our approach. Everyone's in agreement that the marriage and emphasis on soap opera no longer seems to be working as well in the current market as it once did, and that a major part of the imperative should be to restore the Clark-Lois-Superman triangle. This is, to our collective mind, one of the most, if not most important, reader identification elements to the character. Stage 1 sees Clark and Lois split by sending Lois off around the world as the planet's foreign correspondent. This gives us a whole new arrangement to the relationship to play with. Lois and Clark are now physically separated. They still meet often, but as we approach the mid-year, we unleash our big story. The unthinkable has finally happened. Luthor and Brainiac working together have finally unearthed the secret of Superman's dual identity, and they tell the world. The Luthor-Brainiac team-up intensifies its efforts to manifest a global threat. Brainiac turns Earth's suns red to drain Superman's power, and Luthor trips triggers he has had in place for years, all while pitting an ever-weakening Superman against a phalanx of his greatest foes, while the Man of Steel racks his brain trying to figure out not only how to save Earth, but how to get his, and more importantly, Lois's life back. Ultimately, Luthor's threat becomes so grand that it threatens all of space-time, including the fifth dimension, forcing a tense alliance between Superman and Mr. Mxyzptlk. With superhuman effort, Luthor and Brainiac are thwarted, but Brainiac puts his revenge into place by adjusting Lois's chemical memories of Clark's secret identity so that it is killing her. With no conceivable options, Superman turns to Mxyzptlk, who agrees to help only by altering history so that she never knew, thus making there be no memory to poison. Mxyzptlk weaves his spell, and as night falls over the globe, people will begin to fall asleep, and as they do, the world will change and Clark's secret identity will be restored. Mark Kent lives on to play an important role as the connection to Superman's lost past, his own quote-unquote golden age. Pa Kent should die. It seems right somehow that his death should mark Superman's passage into a grander, more iconic phase of his career. Pa gave Clark his values, and Superman will carry them to the stars. The character works best and stands most tall when he's forced to deal with things even his powers cannot help with. And the greatest heroes of myth and legend are always shaped as much by adversity as by triumph. The Daily Planet is no longer a newspaper now, or if it does publish papers, it does so as a gesture of good faith to the faithful. The Daily Planet becomes the world's preeminent global internet news service, read worldwide. For the first time, the citizens of Fiji can read Clark Kent's exclusive on how Superman capped their erupting volcanoes. Not nearly as drastic a move as making Clark a TV reporter, Clark and Lois and Jimmy and Perry maintain their exact same jobs, only the venue changes to something a lot more exciting, accessible, and identifiable to young readers. Superman's super intelligence and increased speed of perception has left him with more time and brain cells to fill, so the Fortress of Solitude became a place of baroque activity once more as Superman becomes the hobbyist par excellence, the polymath who is interested in everything. The fortress becomes a trophy room, laboratory, gymnasium, observatory, a perfect hangout for the ultimate being. Including a myriad of his trophies and other things he has collected from around the galaxy, the fortress also includes a Titanic memorial statues of Jor-El and Lara, a gallery of foes, new upgraded versions of Kelex and the other fortress robots, Superman's JLA boom tube generator, and anything else that occurs as we proceed. Fragments of his rocket, the Electro Superman suit, his Hyperman costume. The emphasis is on cool stuff. A fortress we can do cutaway diagrams of again. The ultimate treehouse. When we meet Luthor, he is playing chess with 20 grandmasters simultaneously while teaching himself Urdu via Walkman he made himself in 5 minutes back in 1962. Luthor is so smart we don't even have a word for what he is yet. Calling him a genius is as insulting as calling him an imbecile. The secret about Luthor is that no one knows yet that despite his born ruthlessness, he was once salvageable, once redeemable. That is, until Superman arrived. Though even he doesn't consciously realize it, every iota of Luthor's self-esteem was pinned on achieving the most lofty goal, to be considered the greatest man who ever lived, and he was on his way to it until Superman appeared and outclassed him in every way, triggering the scattershot sociopathic tantrum that is his criminal career. Luthor's LexCorp empire as well, all the barren corporate stuff we see him do routinely, only takes about 6 minutes of his day, maybe even less. He's not the kingpin everyone assumes he is, he only pretends to be. Luthor the businessman is the tip of the iceberg, a smokescreen generated to give the public and his enemies a false, easily digestible persona which masks his true depths. In other words, Luthor conquered the financial world largely in order to protect his own quote-unquote secret identity, designed to make people underestimate him. LexCorp is one of 1,000 projects Lex Luthor attends to every day. In time, once Superman learns of Luthor's depth, he will come to understand Lex as a tragedy of wasted potential. Though he realizes he could not have handled his earlier formative encounters with Luthor any differently, Superman carries a new weight around in his heart. He knows now that Luthor, but for the path he chose, could have been his equal, his only true peer on this earth. And though Superman's greatest priority will always be to stop Luthor's schemes, his greatest frustration will be his continuing inability to rehabilitate Lex for the good of all mankind. That concludes Morrison, Waid, and Millar's seminal Superman story idea. Over the years, parts of this pitch has been incorporated into not only their own work, but others. Some small ideas even reaching so far as to be incorporated into DC Rebirth, some 20 years after the original pitch. It's a shame we never actually got this run, as it would have totally changed the landscape of character origins and set the bar insanely high for the following interpretations in the preceding years. I hope you enjoyed this unpacking of one of, if not the most insane interpretations of a character, and be sure to tell me what you think about it in the comments below. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you'll check out my other reviews of comics out this week. You can also catch myself and Joel from Cape Joel in our weekly podcasts, Cape TV and the Comic Multiverse, over on his channel, the Weekly Pool Archive channel, and on SoundCloud. Links to them can be found in the description below. Also, you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling a touch generous, I have a cyber tip jar set up. Just follow the links below, and until next time, I am Matt of the Fortress of Solitude, and I will see you in another video.